a frail little girl named Lila clutching her baby brother, tears streaking her cheeks, as her own aunt drags her out of a grocery store for trying to take a carton of milk. The baby is weak, crying from hunger. Phones are raised, people whisper, but no one steps in until a police officer, Ethan Ward, with his loyal German Shepherd Rook at his side, witnesses it all. What he does next will silence the crowd and change their lives forever. Before we begin this story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Leave your city or town in the comments, and may your day be filled with warmth, hope, and blessings. The sky over Millbrook, a modest Midwestern town tucked between long stretches of farmland and two-lane highways, carried the heavy bruised color of late autumn. Clouds hung low and sullen, smothering the sun so thoroughly that even the street lamps blinked on at mid-afternoon. A steady drizzle tapped against the windshields of parked cars, turning the cracked pavement slick and glistening, while the air smelled faintly of wet leaves and gasoline drifting from the service station across the street. Most people hurried with collars raised, eager to escape the damp chill. Inside a police SUV parked near the corner of Main and Cedar, Officer Ethan Ward sat behind the wheel, staring through the rain-streaked windshield. Ethan was 42 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, his build still bearing the strength of a man who had once trained hard for academy drills, though softened now by the quiet years of patrol duty. His short, dark brown hair was flecked heavily with gray at the temples, and his hazel eyes, sharp once but now shadowed, carried the weight of a man who had seen too much of what others tried to ignore. He had joined the force out of a need for justice, but more deeply from a vow made as a boy when his father died, and the world turned its back on him. That vow still hummed beneath his every action. No child would endure humiliation if he could stand in the way. Ethan's personality balanced between stern discipline on duty and a guarded kindness off it, though the latter often lay hidden beneath his quiet reserve. He wore a Navy police uniform beneath a heavy winter coat, its collar turned up against the damp air, and his boots bore the salt-white stains of many shifts spent in bad weather. Beside him in the back seat stretched his constant partner, Rook, a 6-year-old German Shepherd with thick black and silver fur that gleamed even in dim light. Rook's amber eyes radiated alertness, and his muscular frame carried the graceful tension of a guardian, always half ready to spring forward. He was disciplined, trained not only to follow Ethan's commands, but also to read his moods. Around Ethan he softened, leaning his head over the seat when he sensed his handler's heavy thoughts. Yet, in public, he exuded the presence of a quiet sentinel. Rook had been with Ethan for 4 years, and their bond had deepened into something more instinctive than partnership. Each could sense the other's unease before words were ever spoken. Ethan reached over, giving Rook a light pat on the shoulder. "Come on, boy, just a grocery stop," he muttered, more to himself than to the dog. Rook shifted, ears flicking, and rose smoothly to follow as Ethan stepped out into the drizzle. The automatic doors of Marjorie's Market, a small family-owned grocery store that had once been the pride of Millbrook but now sagged with fading neon and worn linoleum, opened with a tired sigh. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed and flickered above aisles, lined with dented cans and the discount cereal. The air smelled of stale coffee from a pot left too long on the burner. Just as Ethan stepped inside, a sharp cry burst from the register area, cutting through the store's monotony like glass shattering. A woman in a pressed blue cashier's uniform was dragging a child by the wrist toward the exit. This was Marjorie Carter, mid-40s, heavy-set, with dyed auburn hair teased high and layered makeup that lent her face a mask-like quality. Her sharp blue eyes were hard as winter ice, her lips painted crimson and pursed with disdain. Marjorie had long carried a reputation in Millbrook as a woman both ambitious and bitter. She had once dreamed of escaping small-town life, but ended up tied to the store after a divorce and years of financial strain. Resentment had grown in her, and it leaked into the way she spoke to others, quick to scold, quicker to condemn. She saw herself as a gatekeeper of propriety, which only sharpened the cruelty with which she judged her own kin. The little girl she dragged was frail, barefoot despite the cold, her small toes blackened with grime. She wore a faded yellow dress frayed at the hem, torn at one side, clinging damply to her thin frame. Her tangled dark hair stuck up in uneven clumps, and her large brown eyes shimmered with terror and exhaustion. She was Lila Carter, just 8 years old, and in her trembling arms she clutched a baby boy scarcely a year old. The infant Noah whimpered weakly, his cheeks sunken, his eyelids drooping from hunger and weariness. Lila's arms wrapped tightly around him, as if her thin body alone could shield him from the world. "Stealing has consequences," Marjorie barked, her voice pitched loud enough to summon the stares of other shoppers. "Don't you dare call me aunt. I won't have a thief for a niece. You're nothing but disgrace to this family." Her red nails dug deeper into Lila's thin wrist, as though marking her with ownership. "I just wanted milk," Lila whispered, her voice fragile, carried on the draft of the open doors. "Please, my brother cried all night." Her words, soft as they were, reached Ethan's ears. He felt his jaw tighten. Rook let out a low growl, his hackles rising. Around them, a few people gathered. Some frowned with pity but stayed still, unwilling to interfere. Others raised their phones, the red dots of recording lights glowing like indifferent eyes. A middle-aged man muttered under his breath that the child shouldn't be grabbed so roughly, but he did not step closer. An elderly woman shook her head, pulling her grandson away. Another woman whispered by the magazine rack, "Isn't that the girl who sleeps under the old bridge?" A man by the refrigerator case added, "I heard their dad gambles and their mom's strung out. Poor kids." Their murmurs blended into a chorus of judgment, heavy and suffocating. Ethan felt the echo of his own past reverberate in his chest, the memory of standing small and unwelcome at his aunt's doorstep after his father's funeral, hearing the words that seared into him, "You don't belong here anymore." That pain, long buried, rose now with renewed heat as he watched Marjorie twist her niece's arm. He stepped forward, his voice carried low but firm, honed by years of authority. "Let her go." Marjorie froze, her sharp eyes flicking up to meet the tall figure in uniform, with the German shepherd poised at his side like a shadow of judgment itself. The store fell into a hush. Ethan continued, his tone calm but resonant enough to reach every phone raised in the crowd. "Run my card. As many cartons of milk as you've got, put them on me. Formula, diapers, water. Add a child's coat if you have one. And don't you ever humiliate a child in front of this town again." The scanner beeped, the sound sharp and final. Marjorie's grip loosened against her will. Lila stood frozen, eyes wide, clutching Noah tighter, as if unable to comprehend why a stranger had stepped onto her side. The baby let out a sigh, small and weary, but softer than before. Ethan leaned close to Lila, his voice gentle enough to rest on her ear alone. "You've done nothing wrong. Tell me your name." Her lips trembled, but she answered, "I'm Lila Carter. This is my brother Noah. He's one—" "You carried him here yourself?" Ethan asked, his hazel eyes softening. Lila nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Yesterday we ran out of milk." He wouldn't stop crying. I waited until Mom fell asleep before I snuck out. Sometimes she screams, and I was scared to leave him alone." Rook lowered his head, nudging lightly against the girl's knee as if to reassure her. Lila flinched at first, then blinked at the warm amber eyes meeting hers. Ethan gestured toward the counter. "Put the milk there. Everything's lawful now. You'll take it home safe." With trembling hands, Lila placed the carton on the counter as though offering up a treasure. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "I'll pay you back when I grow up." "I mean it." "I believe you," Ethan replied softly, his voice steady as an oath. Behind them, the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A young man lowered his phone, muttering an apology. An elderly woman slipped a tissue packet into Lila's pocket. But Marjorie, face flushed and lips taut, spat out suddenly, "She's my niece. Her mother and that girl are nothing but trouble." Ethan turned to her, his voice harder now. "Then you should remember even more that family deserves to be treated like family." The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. For the first time, Lila's head lifted slightly, her eyes glinting with something more than fear, something closer to fragile hope. The drizzle had thickened into a steady curtain by the time Ethan stepped back onto the street. The neon glow from Marjorie's market flickered behind him as the crowd dispersed, murmuring half-formed judgments that clung to the damp air like smoke. Ethan's broad frame was soaked at the shoulders despite his heavy coat, and beside him, Rook shook the rain from his thick fur. amber eyes fixed on the girl, an infant disappearing down Cedar Street. Lila clutched the grocery bag close to her chest, Noah's small head buried against her collarbone, while her thin legs carried her with the stubborn resolve of someone far older than her years. Ethan's instincts told him not to let them vanish into the gray evening. He followed at a respectful distance, boots striking quietly against wet pavement, while Rook padded beside him, body taut but restrained. The rain blurred the edges of the world, muffling the sound of traffic, reducing the town to a hush of dripping eaves and swaying power lines. At the far end of Cedar Street, beyond shuttered laundromats and a pawn shop with half its neon letters burned out, the girl turned down an embankment lined with cracked concrete. Ethan slowed, watching her small figure slip beneath the overpass, where the bridge's steel ribs arched overhead. The space smelled of rust, oil, and damp cardboard. There stood a woman, waiting in the shadows, her back bent slightly, her hair matted with rain and clinging to her hollow cheeks. This was Dana Carter, Lila's mother. Dana was in her mid-30s, once tall and graceful, with striking dark eyes, but years of hardship had left her frame gaunt, her skin pale with shadows beneath her eyes. Her coat, thin and torn at the cuffs, hung loosely as if it belonged to someone else. The faint scratch marks on her forearms suggested years of desperate struggle, some self-inflicted, some inflicted by others. Her temperament was wary, defensive, and quick to flare at even the smallest gesture of pity. She had been hardened not by choice, but by survival. After enduring an abusive marriage and leaning on substances to dull her pain, trust had become a luxury she no longer allowed herself. She reached forward, pulling Lila sharply toward her side. "What are you doing bringing strangers into this?" she demanded, her voice hoarse with exhaustion, yet edged with fear. Her eyes cut toward Ethan, narrowing as though he were an intruder, encroaching on her last fragile boundary. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Ethan said, his tone even, hands open at his sides. Rook stood still, though the low rumble in his throat warned he was ready if danger appeared. "The baby needs more than rainwater and damp blankets. I bought supplies. Take them." He lowered the bag to the ground, careful not to step closer. Dana's gaze darted to the bag, then back to Ethan. "We don't need charity," she spat, though her voice faltered slightly as Noah gave a weak cough against his sister's shoulder. Lila looked up at her mother, eyes pleading, but said nothing. She had learned that silence often kept storms at bay. Before Ethan could answer, a burst of laughter erupted nearby. A group of teenagers had gathered near the graffiti-splattered wall of the underpass, hoods pulled low over their faces. They had followed from the main street, drawn by the promise of drama. One lanky boy with a shock of blonde hair sticking out from beneath his hood called out, "Look at the bridge rats! Stealing milk now, huh?" His friend, shorter and stockier, hurled a small stone that clattered near Lila's bare feet. The children flinched. Dana straightened, fury flashing across her tired features, but she did not move forward. Ethan's jaw tightened. He took 2 strides closer, his badge catching the dim light of the bridge. "That's enough," he barked. His voice carried the unmistakable command of law, and Rook stepped forward with a growl so deep it vibrated against the concrete walls. The teenagers hesitated, sneering, faltering, before scattering into the rain with muttered curses. Silence returned, broken only by the hiss of passing cars overhead. Ethan looked back at Dana. She hugged her children closer, her arms trembling. "You see?" she whispered bitterly. "They only ever come to watch us suffer." "I'm not them," Ethan replied. His hazel eyes softened, though his stance remained steady. "I can't force you to trust me, but I won't walk away while a baby burns with hunger." He nudged the bag slightly forward with his boot. "Use it, or throw it out." But no someone tried to help. For a long moment Dana stood frozen, her damp hair plastered to her temples, her breath rising in sharp clouds. Finally she bent, snatched the bag, and drew it close. "Go," she said flatly. "Leave us." Ethan nodded once, pulling Rook gently back. He turned toward the slope, the rain plastering his coat to his frame, but before stepping out from under the bridge, he looked once more at Lila. She was kneeling on the concrete, cradling Noah as she tucked the small carton of milk against her chest like treasure. Her eyes lifted briefly to meet his, a spark of fragile gratitude flickering in the gloom. Ethan held her gaze for a heartbeat, then walked out into the storm. That night, as Ethan drove back through Millbrook's winding streets, the memory of Lila's whisper clung to him. His mind replayed her words from the store. "I'll pay you back when I grow up." He knew promises like that were born from desperation, not debt. Yet he also knew that children who learned to carry burdens too young often carried them forever. In the SUV's back seat, Rook lay curled but awake, eyes following his handler in the mirror. Ethan reached back, brushing his fingers against the dog's shoulder. "We'll keep an eye on them," he murmured. "They're not safe out here." Rook exhaled softly, resting, his head on his paws as if agreeing that the night was far from finished. The storm did not loosen its grip that night. By the time darkness folded over Millbrook, the rain had turned from a steady curtain into pounding sheets that rattled against rooftops and slashed across windshields. The streets gleamed black under broken street lamps, streams of water rushing along gutters like tiny rivers. Beneath the bridge, the air grew clammy and sharp, the drip-drip of leaking rainwater soaking through cardboard and threadbare blankets. Ethan could not shake the image of Lila clutching the milk like a relic. Though Dana had pushed him away, his instincts kept pulling him back. He circled past the bridge in his SUV, headlights dimmed, Rook lifting his head with every pass. The German shepherd's ears flicked, and he gave a restless whine, sensing his handler's unease. By midnight, Ethan caught sight of a small figure darting into the rain. Lila. She held Noah tightly against her chest, but the baby's small face glowed with fever, flushed and slick with sweat despite the cold. Dana staggered behind them, her hair plastered flat, her torn coat clinging to her thin frame. Panic radiated from her sharp movements, but she hesitated as if unsure where to go. Ethan stopped the SUV with a screech, stepping into the downpour. His boots splashed through water pooling at the curb as he approached. "He's sick," he said firmly, not as a question, but as a fact. Dana clutched the baby closer, lips pressed thin, defiance and fear wrestling inside her eyes. "He just needs to sleep," Dana rasped, her voice frayed, though Noah's wheezing breaths betrayed her. "We'll manage." "No," Ethan replied, his hazel eyes steady. "He needs warmth and medicine." "I can get you both." Lila's wide eyes lifted to her mother, then to Ethan, and then dropped back to Noah. She whispered, "Mama, he's burning up." Her small voice cracked like glass under strain. Dana's face softened, the hardness crumbling for a fraction of a second. Finally, she gave the slightest nod. Ethan opened the SUV's back door. "Get in." Now, inside the vehicle, the heater hummed and the interior smelled faintly of wet dog and leather polish. Rook shifted to the side, giving the children room. He lowered his head, sniffing softly at Noah, then settled into a watchful stance as though accepting this fragile cargo under his guard. Ethan drove through the storm, wipers thrashing across the windshield, until a flicker of neon emerged from the haze. The Riverside Motel, a roadside building whose yellow sign buzzed with half-dead letters. The parking lot was nearly empty, puddles reflecting the dull glow of the office window. At the counter stood Samir Patel, the night clerk. Samir was in his early 30s, short and solidly built, with neatly combed black hair and thick glasses perched low on his nose. His cardigan was buttoned despite the warmth inside, a habit formed from long nights at the desk. Samir had emigrated from India 5 years earlier, juggling shifts at the motel while finishing accounting courses. Life had tempered him into a man brisk in speech but gentle at heart, someone who quietly extended kindness where he saw need without ever demanding recognition. The bell above the door jingled as Ethan entered, rain streaming from his coat. Behind him, Dana clutched Noah, and Lila hovered protectively at her side. Samir looked up, eyes sharp with curiosity but not judgment. "Late night," he said, voice tired yet even. "One room, tonight, no deposit trouble," Ethan said, placing his badge discreetly on the counter with his card. "It's an emergency." Samir's eyes flicked to the children. He gave a small nod, slid the key across, and murmured, "Room 6, heater works fine, I'll bring tea." His tone carried no questions, only quiet understanding. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old curtains, but the heater hummed steadily. The The bedspread was stiff but clean. Lila laid Noah gently on the bed, her thin fingers clumsy but practiced as she adjusted his blanket. She touched the clean white sheet, then pulled her hand back quickly as if afraid she might soil something too fine. "It's soft," she whispered to no one in particular, her eyes locked on her brother's flushed face. "Like clouds." Ethan watched from the doorway, his chest tightening. He remembered his own boyhood nights on cold cement, the sting of being told he didn't belong anywhere. He walked into the bathroom, ran warm water into the sink, and draped a damp towel over Lila's shoulder. "Swap this out for his forehead," he said quietly. Dana leaned against the wall, fists clenching the hem of her coat, her eyes darting between her children and the stranger before her. Gratitude fought with fear in her gaze. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might bind her into a debt she couldn't repay. Ethan didn't answer directly. "Because he needs it." His tone carried no charity, only the weight of duty. A soft knock sounded on the doorframe. Samir stood there holding 2 steaming cups of tea and a small thermometer. "On the house," he said simply. "Cold nights make little ones feverish." He set the tray down and stepped back quickly, careful not to intrude. Dana stared at him, startled by the kindness. She whispered, "Thank you," her voice cracking as though the words themselves had grown unfamiliar. Later, as Noah's fever eased slightly under Lila's careful ministrations, Ethan pulled a chair near the door and sat down. He leaned back, arms crossed, though his hazel eyes never closed. "I'll stay here. You lock the door. Call me if anything changes." He placed a bottle of water and a packet of instant oatmeal on the nightstand, his movements practical but deliberate. Rook curled on the floor near the bed, head resting between his paws, ears twitching with every sound from outside. The rain hammered the roof, the wind whistled under the doorframe, but inside the small room, a fragile stillness took root. Lila sat at the edge of the bed, one hand resting on Noah's shoulder as she finally allowed her eyes to close. Dana remained upright longer, her thin frame trembling. She glanced at Ethan in the chair, at the dog keeping watch, and then at her children sleeping under a blanket not borrowed or stolen, but given. For the first time in years, she whispered a word she had nearly forgotten. Safe. By morning, the storm had thinned to a misty drizzle, but the town of Millbrook woke to a new kind of tempest, one carried not by clouds, but by glowing screens. In the motel room, the heater still hummed as Lila rubbed sleep from her eyes and checked Noah's breathing. Dana sat at the foot of the bed, staring at her raw hands, torn cuticles red from worry. Ethan stood near the window, his tall frame filling the thin curtains with shadow as he scrolled through his phone. His jaw tightened with each headline. Someone had uploaded a shaky clip of the grocery store incident. The video showed Lila being yanked by Marjorie, but the angle cut away just before Ethan pulled out his card. The edit ended with his hand on the counter, leaving out the purchase entirely. Bold captions splashed across the screen. "Officer exploits child for sympathy." Publicity stunt in uniform. Within hours it had been shared across feeds and forums, dissected by strangers who knew nothing of the truth. Ethan exhaled sharply. His badge weighed heavier on his chest now than the coat he wore. He knew perception was power, and right now perception was turning against him. Rook, sensing his unease, padded closer, pressing his head gently against Ethan's leg. The German shepherd's fur was still damp from the night, but his eyes were bright and steady, as though reminding his handler to keep his ground. A knock at the door drew Dana's head up in alarm. Ethan motioned for her to stay calm before he opened it. Standing outside was Officer Laura Ramirez, early 30s, slender and sharp-featured with olive-toned skin and dark hair tied into a precise bun. Her uniform was crisp, boots polished despite the rain, and her eyes carried the quick intelligence of someone who saw more than she let on. Ramirez had grown up in Millbrook herself, the daughter of immigrant parents who ran a bakery that barely survived the 2008 crash. That loss had hardened her into a woman allergic to injustice and unafraid of confrontation. "You're all over the feeds ward," Ramirez said without preamble, stepping inside. She cast a brief glance at Dana and the children, her gaze softening only for a moment before turning professional again. "The department is jittery. Command wants answers." "I did my job," Ethan replied, his voice low but steady. I stopped a child from being humiliated and made sure her baby brother didn't starve. That's the truth. The truth doesn't trend, Ramirez muttered, folding her arms. Then she turned to Dana. Ma'am, I'm Officer Ramirez. I'm here to make sure you and your kids are safe. Dana's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering like a knife edge. She looked worn, her face pale, but her tone carried the defiance of someone who had been cornered too many times. Safe? From who? You people can't even keep your own honest. Ramirez met her glare without flinching. Safe from the storm outside. Videos twist. Faster than we can untangle. That means people will come sniffing. Reporters, opportunists, maybe worse. You don't want to be caught in the middle of that. From the far corner of the room, Lila's small voice broke in. She's telling the truth, Mama. Everyone was watching us last night. Her eyes dropped to Noah, who stirred weakly in her arms. Dana's shoulders sagged, her resistance melting into fatigue. Ethan rubbed his temples. We need the full recording. Someone has it. Someone saw Brenda's hand digging into that girl's arm. Ramirez nodded. I already spoke to Chen. He's canvassing the store staff. If anyone kept a clean copy, we'll find it. Officer Kenji Chen, late 20s, was Ramirez's partner and the opposite in temperament. Where Ramirez was sharp-edged, Chen was measured, with calm brown eyes and an unhurried manner that made even hostile witnesses breathe easier. He was the son of a local mechanic, raised in a garage filled with oil and radio static, and his quiet diligence came from years of watching his father rebuild engines piece by piece. He had texted Ramirez earlier that morning. Something's off with Brenda. Another cashier looked nervous, following up. Ramirez glanced back at Ethan. Chen thinks the girl, Tina Lopez, might have more. She's young, new to the job, and doesn't look comfortable with Brenda's story. Ethan absorbed the words, his mind clicking through possibilities. He trusted Chen's instincts. Quiet types saw details, loud voices missed. Dana spoke suddenly, her voice hoarse. Even if someone proves the video's fake, what happens then? People don't care. They'll just move on to another lie. Ethan crouched slightly to meet her eyes, his broad shoulders blocking the thin light from the window. Maybe. But your kids deserve a world where the truth has a chance to stand. I can't promise more than that. Dana looked away, her lips trembling. Lila, however, studied Ethan's face with an intensity beyond her years, as though weighing whether his promise was one she could rest against. A buzz from Ramirez's radio broke the moment. Chen found her, she said quickly. Tina Lopez. She wants to talk. Later that day, in the cramped back office of the precinct, Tina sat wringing her hands. She was in her early 20s, slight and soft-spoken, with pale skin and long, dark hair that she kept tucking nervously behind her ears. A part-time cashier and part-time community college student, she had taken the job to pay tuition bills. Life had taught her to avoid conflict, but guilt had driven her here. I saved the footage, she admitted, sliding a flash drive across the desk. I couldn't delete it. Brenda told me to, but I couldn't. The audio's clear. You can hear the girl begging for milk before Officer Ward stepped in. Ramirez leaned forward, her expression softening. You did the right thing. This will help protect them. Tina's voice shook. She'll come after me if she finds out. She won't, Ethan said firmly, his hazel eyes locking onto hers. We'll make sure of it. Ramirez copied the file, her movements quick and precise. Then she glanced at Ethan. Now we've got leverage. But the department will still demand you keep low profile until this clears. They don't like their officers going viral for the wrong reasons. Ethan felt the familiar tug of frustration, but he swallowed it down. The badge was not just a job. It was a fragile contract between him and the town. He could not afford to snap it in half. As evening fell, he drove back to the motel, Rook resting quietly in the back, his ears twitching at every car that passed. The German Shepherd's presence was steady, grounding Ethan as doubts pressed harder. When they pulled into the lot, Lila was waiting at the window, her small face pressed against the glass, her eyes searching until they landed on him. For the first time that day, Ethan's chest loosened. However loud the storm outside became, he knew exactly why he could not let it drown her out. The following evening, Millbrook's skies turned dark again, though the rain had lessened to a heavy mist that clung to hair and clothes like cold breath. The park at the edge of town, once bright with families on summer evenings, now lay nearly empty. Rusted swings swayed lightly in the damp wind, their chains squealing, and puddles reflected fractured streetlights that hummed against the fog. Ethan's SUV rolled slowly along the cracked lane, skirting the park, Rook alert in the back seat. The German shepherd pressed his nose to the glass, nostrils flaring, a low whine escaping his throat. Ethan trusted the dog's instincts more than any GPS. Rook knew when something was wrong. Through the drizzle, Ethan spotted a small figure curled on a bench near the duck pond. It was Lila, her thin dress clinging to her knees, her hair plastered flat against her cheeks. She rocked Noah gently in her lap, crooning a lullaby in a voice hoarse from cold. The baby whimpered weakly, his breath shallow, though quieter than the night before. Lila's face was pale, her lips tinged blue, but her eyes stayed fixed on her brother with stubborn devotion. Ethan pulled up and stepped out, boots splashing into the mud. "Lila," he called softly. She startled, then tightened her arms around Noah. Behind the bench, Dana emerged from the trees. Her coat was soaked through, her hair tangled in wet ropes, and her expression was sharp with suspicion. "Why are you following us?" she demanded, her voice trembling between anger and fear. "I'm not here to hunt you," Ethan said, his hazel eyes steady. "I'm here to make sure your children don't freeze." He gestured to the car. "It's warm inside. Towels, blankets, medicine." Before Dana could answer, the sound of footsteps cut through the mist. From the slope above the pond came a tall man in a dark hoodie, his wiry frame outlined against the dim light. His eyes burned with a feverish gleam, and his gait carried the confidence of someone who knew he owned the ground he walked on. The sharp stench of alcohol and stale smoke clung to him, stronger than the wet air. This was Darnell Thompson, Noah's father. In his late 30s, his face was lean, angular, and prematurely aged by years of gambling and violence. He had once been handsome in the careless way of men who live by charm and fists, but bitterness had hollowed him. His jaw was shadowed with stubble, and his lips curled into a smirk that promised trouble. He had a temper known around town: bar fights, unpaid debts, a string of bruised faces left behind. Yet the law had never quite pinned him, for he always vanished before papers could be served. "Well, well," Darnell drawled, snapping his fingers against the brim of his hood. "Family reunion by the pond." His eyes darted past Dana to Ethan, narrowing at the sight of the uniform and badge glinting faintly. "And what's this?" A cop playing guardian angel? Lila stiffened, clutching Noah tighter. "Mama," she whispered. Dana stepped forward, trying to shield her children. Her face, already pale, drained further. "Darnell, don't cause a scene. The baby, he's sick." Darnell's laugh was thin and cruel. "Sick because of you people, always breaking the rules, always thinking you can run." He shifted his gaze to Ethan. "What are you supposed to be? Their savior? You think money or a badge buys safety out here?" Ethan stood his ground, shoulders squared. Rook positioned himself slightly ahead, body tense, teeth bared in a silent warning. The dog's thick fur bristled, making him appear even larger, and his amber eyes locked on the intruder without wavering. "I'm the one who bought milk for your son," Ethan said evenly, "and I won't stand by while you threaten them." Darnell sneered. "They're mine. My blood." He lunged a step forward, reaching as though to grab Lila's wrist. Lila cried out, clutching Noah so tightly her knuckles went white. Dana moved instinctively, placing herself between Darnell and the children. "Don't touch her," she shouted, her voice breaking. Darnell raised his arm to shove her aside. Ethan pivoted, stepping directly in front of Dana, his broad frame a wall. He didn't draw his weapon. Instead, he raised his forearm, catching Darnell's swing midair. Their eyes locked, the space between them crackling with tension. "Enough," Ethan said, his tone cold as steel. Darnell strained against his grip, teeth bared. "Let go." "No one lays a hand on them," Ethan answered, tightening his hold. The standoff drew the attention of a jogger passing on the path. The man slowed, wide-eyed, fumbling with his phone. The faint wail of a siren echoed in the distance, carried on the damp wind like an omen. Darnell's eyes flicked toward the sound, then back to Ethan. His smirk faltered. You think this ends tonight? You can't protect them forever. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low enough only for Darnell to hear. Watch me. The sirens grew louder until flashing lights cut through the fog. Two figures emerged from the patrol car, Ramirez and Chen. Ramirez's voice rang out, firm and commanding. You in the jacket, hands where I can see them. Chen flanked her quietly, his calm eyes scanning the scene. His hand rested on his cuffs, ready but not rushed. Darnell twisted his head back, raising his hands halfway with a mocking smile. I'm the legal father. They're kidnapping my kid. He jabbed a finger at Dana and Ethan. Ramirez didn't blink. What I see is a disturbance and a threat. Step back. Now Ethan slowly released Darnell's wrist, though his stance remained unyielding. Lila whimpered, her small voice carrying over the damp air. I just wanted my brother to have milk. Please stop! The words hit harder than any shove. Ramirez exchanged a glance with Chen, then gave a sharp nod. Cuff him! Chen moved quickly, his movements efficient. Darnell Thompson, you're being detained for disturbing the peace and making violent threats. You have the right to remain silent. Darnell snarled, twisting, but Chen locked the cuffs with practiced strength. Dana sagged against the bench, her hands trembling. Lila pressed against her mother, tears streaming, while Ethan placed a steadying hand on Dana's shoulder. Breathe, he murmured. Ramirez surveyed the family, her expression softening briefly. Do you need medical help? She asked. Dana shook her head, voice hoarse. Just get him away from us. As the officers led Darnell down the path, his voice rang out like a curse. This isn't over. You'll pay for this. Ramirez shoved him forward, her voice sharp. That's enough. When the footsteps faded, only the sound of dripping trees and Lila's soft sobs remained. Ethan crouched in front of her, his hazel eyes steady, his voice low but firm. He can't hurt you right now. You're safe. Lila nodded faintly, her small hands still wrapped protectively around Noah. For the first time, she leaned slightly toward Ethan, as though allowing herself to believe his words. Rook sat at Ethan's side, his ears alert, his body a barrier between the children and the world. His presence was silent reassurance, a reminder that they were no longer alone. The police car carrying Darnell's shouts disappeared into the fog, leaving behind only the hush of dripping branches and the faint stir of sirens fading into distance. Ethan stood by the bench where Dana sat slumped, her arms wrapped around Lila and Noah, as though holding them against the whole world. His hazel eyes softened, but his voice remained steady. You can't stay in the park. There's a place for you tonight. A shelter. It's safe. Dana raised her head, eyes hollow from years of mistrust. Shelters aren't safe. People take, people pry, people whisper. Her voice carried bitterness like an old scar. She had spent nights in halfway houses years ago when Darnell abandoned them the first time. She remembered harsh fluorescent lights, locked doors, the sneers of other residents. The memory gnawed at her trust now. You won't be alone, Ethan said. Rook pressed against his leg, amber eyes fixed on Dana, his stance protective yet calm. The German shepherd seemed to understand when fear lingered in the air. He radiated steadiness like an anchor. After a long silence, Dana gave a weak nod. Ethan helped her stand, his strong frame supporting her weight as she wavered. Lila clutched Noah tightly, following close as though afraid her family might splinter if she let go. The East Side Women's Shelter sat at the edge of Millbrook, a brick building softened by murals of sunflowers painted by local volunteers. Inside, the air smelled faintly of detergent and warm bread. The walls were lined with bulletin boards covered in children's drawings, houses with red roofs, stick-figure families holding hands, dogs with wide smiles. At the front desk sat Nora Bennett, the shelter's social worker. Nora was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with soft auburn hair streaked lightly with gray. She wore a cream-colored sweater and glasses perched on her nose, her expression both composed and deeply empathetic. Nora carried herself with quiet authority, the kind that did not need to raise its voice. Years earlier, she had nearly lost her younger sister to domestic violence. The trauma had shaped her life's work. That history gave her a mixture of firmness and gentleness. She would not let victims slip into shadows, yet she knew how to listen when silence weighed heavier than words. When Ethan entered with Dana and the children, Nora rose immediately. Her eyes flicked from Lila's bare feet to Noah's flushed cheeks, then to Dana's gaunt frame. "Come in," she said softly, extending her hand toward Dana without forcing contact. "You're safe here?" Dana's body stiffened, but she stepped forward. Lila lingered by Ethan's side, her small fingers brushing the hem of his coat. Rook lowered himself onto his haunches near the doorway, his posture calm but alert, as if already taking responsibility for the building itself. Nora guided them to a small intake office, its walls painted a pale blue, meant to soothe. She handed Dana a cup of water. "We'll need to talk through next steps," she explained, her voice measured. "This isn't just about tonight. You need more than a warm bed. You need support, treatment, stability for the children." Dana's eyes flicked away, jaw tightening. "You mean rehab?" "Yes," Nora answered, not flinching. "I mean facing what's kept you trapped. And while you do, we'll need to consider temporary guardianship. Your children can't keep sleeping under bridges." The words struck like stones. Dana's hands trembled around the cup. "They're mine," she whispered fiercely. "I've already lost enough." Nora leaned forward, her tone gentler now. "Keeping them safe doesn't mean losing them. It means giving them back a mother who can stand steady again." Ethan remained by the wall, watching quietly. His presence seemed to give Dana a strange balance, both a reminder of her vulnerability and a pillar she could lean against. Meanwhile, Lila sat at a small table in the corner, crayons and paper spread before her. Nora had placed them there deliberately, knowing children spoke better through drawings than words. Lila bent over her page, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Slowly, she sketched a square house with glowing yellow windows, a chimney puffing smoke. Above the roof, she scrawled a crooked line of stars. At the bottom, two small stick figures held hands beside a taller one. She stared at it for a long moment before adding a dog at the edge, its pointed ears standing tall. When Ethan walked past, he paused. The drawing caught him off guard. His throat tightened at the sight of the glowing windows. "Is that your house?" he asked gently. "It's the one I wish we had," Lila whispered, her voice almost ashamed, as if wishing might be a sin. "With lights that never go out." Ethan crouched beside her, his broad frame folding awkwardly, but his voice softened. "That's a good wish, Lila. One worth holding on to." Rook patted over, resting his heavy head on the table edge, amber eyes fixed on the crayon house as if silently vowing to guard it. Lila giggled faintly, the sound small but real, her hand stroking the thick black and silver fur. Back in the office, Dana sat rigid, but her defenses cracked under Nora's steady persistence. "I don't want them taken from me," she admitted in a rush, tears burning her eyes. "But I can't keep running like this." "I'm tired. I'm so tired," Nora reached out, placing a hand lightly on Dana's wrist. "Then let us carry part of that weight, just until you can stand again." For the first time in years, Dana let her tears fall without turning away. Ethan stepped forward, offering a tissue silently. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and for a brief second, trust flickered in her eyes, thin as a thread, but present. That night, the shelter's hallway glowed with dim golden lights. Lila slept curled beside Noah in a clean bed, clutching her drawing of the glowing house to her chest. Dana sat in the chair nearby, head bowed but posture less rigid, as if the storm inside her had eased slightly. Outside the door, Rook lay stretched across the threshold, a silent sentinel, ensuring nothing and no one disturbed the fragile peace within. Ethan stood at the end of the hall, speaking quietly with Nora. She laid out the plan. Dana would be referred to a rehab program in the next county, while Child Services would oversee temporary guardianship. "It won't be easy," Nora warned, adjusting her glasses, her voice steady. "But if she fights for them, they'll have a chance." Ethan glanced back at the door, where Rook guarded the family. His hazel eyes carried both determination and weariness. "Then I'll fight too." The courthouse in Millbrook stood like an old sentinel at the center of town, its brick walls weathered by decades of storms. On the morning of the hearing, the air carried a biting chill that seeped into bones despite the pale sunlight. Outside, a cluster of reporters waited with cameras and notepads, their breath forming plumes of frost as they murmured speculation about the case. Inside, the smell of polished wood and paper filled the air. Ethan walked into the hallway, his tall frame in uniform, Rook trotting at his side. The German Shepherd drew stairs, his thick black and silver coat gleaming under the overhead lights, his ears sharp, his gait steady. Though regulations discouraged dogs in courtrooms, Rook had been granted an exception. The social worker had argued his presence calmed the children. Ethan knew it was true. For Lila, the dog had become a kind of guardian angel made flesh. Dana sat on a bench just outside the courtroom doors, her thin frame wrapped in a borrowed gray sweater. Her hair had been brushed back neatly for the first time in weeks, but shadows still clung under her eyes. She clutched a folder Nora had given her, rehab intake forms, letters of intent, proof that she was beginning to walk the narrow path toward recovery. Dana looked fragile, yet her hands no longer trembled as much. Lila perched beside her, Noah asleep in her lap. The girl wore a simple blue dress donated by the shelter, her hair braided carefully by one of the volunteers that morning. Her brown eyes darted around the hallway, nervous but curious, until they found Rook. The German Shepherd lowered his head so she could press her small palm against his fur. A faint smile flickered on her face. The courtroom doors opened, and they were called inside. The space was solemn, with high windows letting in slanted beams of light. At the front sat Judge Caroline Brooks, a woman in her early 50s with sharp cheekbones and silver-streaked brown hair pulled into a bun. She had a reputation for balance, neither swayed by pity nor hardened by bureaucracy. Her dark eyes, however, revealed someone who had seen too many broken families come and go through those doors. At one table sat Assistant District Attorney Marcus Lee, mid-40s, stocky with salt and pepper hair and a voice trained to carry across courtrooms. He specialized in child welfare cases, driven by memories of his own younger brother lost to the foster system years ago. His demeanor was calm but relentless when it came to protecting children. Across from him was Victor Alvarez, a court-appointed attorney in his late 30s, lean with restless energy. His dark suit rumpled as though he had slept in it. Alvarez had built his career defending clients no one else wanted. Cynical and sharp-tongued, he believed everyone deserved a voice, though his methods often grated. He represented Darnell, who now sat shackled at the defense table, his hoodie replaced by county-issued clothing, his smirk still intact. Nora Bennett stood near the children's table, her posture composed, auburn hair gleaming under the light. She carried her clipboard like a shield, prepared to testify about Dana's progress and the children's needs. Ethan stayed behind them, arms folded, his steady presence a wall of support. The hearing began. Marcus Lee rose first, laying out charges. Your Honor, the state requests an emergency no-contact order against Mr. Darnell Thompson, citing domestic abuse, repeated threats of harm, and endangerment of 2 minors. He handed over photographs of bruises on Dana's arm, reports from Ramirez and Chen, and Tina Lopez's unedited video proving Ethan's intervention at the store. Alvarez countered, voice slick. Your Honor, my client is the legal father. He denies abuse and asserts his right to maintain contact with his children. What we see here is a campaign to strip him of his rights under emotional pretense. Judge Brooks listened without visible reaction, her pen scratching notes. She then turned to Nora. Miss Bennett, your assessment? Nora adjusted her glasses, her voice calm but firm. The children are currently safe under supervision. The boy shows signs of malnutrition. The girl exhibits fear when her father is mentioned. The mother, Miss Carter, has entered a treatment program voluntarily. Our recommendation is a no-contact order for Mr. Thompson in temporary guardianship until the mother demonstrates stability, Darnell muttered under his breath, his shackled hands twitching, but a bailiff's warning glare silenced him. Then came the moment Judge Brooks addressed the children's table. Lila Carter, would you like to speak? The courtroom stilled. Lila froze, her small hands tightening around Noah. Her wide eyes flicked to her mother, then to Ethan, then to Rook at her side. The German Shepherd tilted his head, amber eyes calm. Slowly, Lila stood, clutching her brother's blanket in one hand. She stepped toward the small witness chair, her legs trembling. The bailiff adjusted the microphone down to her height. Judge Brooks leaned slightly forward, her voice gentler. "Lila, you don't have to be afraid. Just tell us what you want." Lila's voice cracked but rang clear. "I want my mom, but I want him too." She pointed toward Ethan. "I feel safe when he's around. When Darnell came at the park, he stood in front of us. Rook too. I just want us not to be scared anymore." Gasps whispered through the room. Ethan's chest tightened, his jaw clenched to keep steady. Dana covered her face with her hands, tears spilling through her fingers. Judge Brooks tapped her pen, her eyes soft but serious. "Thank you, Lila. That was very brave." After deliberation, she gave her ruling. The court issues a no-contact order against Mr. Thompson. Miss Carter will continue treatment under supervision for the children's immediate stability. Officer Ethan Ward is appointed temporary guardian in cooperation with Child Protective Services until the mother completes the first phase of her program. The gavel struck, and the room seemed to exhale. Darnell snarled as bailiffs led him out, his voice low and venomous. "This isn't the end." Dana trembled, but Ethan's hand rested gently on her shoulder. "He can't reach them now," he said quietly. Lila returned to her seat, slipping her hand into Ethan's. For the first time, her smile held not just hope, but relief. Rook leaned against her side, his tail sweeping once across the floor, as if affirming the bond. The day after the hearing dawned gray and brittle, the kind of morning where frost crusted the edges of windows and the air outside stung lungs raw. Ethan stood at the kitchen counter of his modest house on Maple Street, pouring coffee into a heavy ceramic mug. The walls of the kitchen were painted pale green, their age betrayed by faint cracks near the ceiling. A few framed photographs lined the counter: his academy graduation, a fishing trip with his late father, a candid shot of Rook as a pup. The home had long been quiet, but now the hush was broken by the soft shuffle of smaller feet. Lila padded in, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Her hair, still tangled from sleep, was tied with a piece of string one of the shelter volunteers had given her. Her wide brown eyes scanned the kitchen with cautious curiosity. She wore a sweater borrowed from the shelter, slightly too big, sleeves swallowing her hands. Noah followed in her arms, heavy with sleep but whimpering softly, his small head resting against her shoulder. Ethan crouched, his broad shoulders lowering until he was eye level with her. "Morning," he said, his hazel eyes softer than usual. "There's oatmeal on the stove. Wanna try?" Lila nodded timidly. She set Noah into the high chair Ethan had borrowed from the precinct's donation drive, then slid onto a chair herself. She opened her sketchbook, the crayon house from the shelter still visible. She began adding details: a dog at the doorway, a policeman standing tall beside it. Ethan noticed but said nothing. Rook padded into the room, shaking his thick coat. He was 6 years old, strong and muscular, with black and silver fur that glistened in the morning light. He nuzzled Noah's chair, earning a sleepy giggle, then settled near the table, tail thumping quietly against the floor. His presence seemed to knit the room together, a steady reminder of safety. As the children ate, a knock came at the door. Ethan opened it to find Rachel Park, his attorney, mid-30s, with sleek black hair tied into a low bun, and a charcoal suit that looked crisp even in the morning chill. Rachel was a woman of precise words and sharper instincts. She had grown up the daughter of small business owners, learning early how easily lives could crumble when trust was misplaced. That history had made her fiercely protective of her clients. "You're already a news story," Rachel said, stepping inside, removing her gloves with practiced efficiency. "Half the town sees you as a saint, the other half calls you reckless, and Darnell's threats are still echoing through back channels. We need to be prepared." Lila stiffened at the name, drawing closer to Rook. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "He won't come near you again," he assured. Turning to Rachel, he asked, "What about Brenda?" Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line. "The DA's office is reviewing charges against her for child endangerment and defamation, but she still works her shifts. Some people defend her." She adjusted her glasses. "We'll need airtight testimony." And Lila's words yesterday helped, but we can't lean on a child for everything. Dana entered the room just then, wearing jeans and a long-sleeved shirt that looked almost new, donated from the shelter. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail, her face pale but more composed than before. She was starting rehab that week, supervised closely by Nora. Her hands trembled less today, though her eyes still carried the rawness of someone learning to live without a crutch. She leaned against the doorway, listening. "I'll testify," Dana said hoarsely. "I let too much happen in silence." No more. Rachel studied her, then gave a single nod. "Good. But know that the defense will dig into everything. Your past, your mistakes. You'll need to stay steady." Dana's lips pressed thin, but determination flickered there. "I can be steady for them," she said, glancing at her children. After Rachel left, the house quieted again. Ethan set about creating order, assigning chores to Lila, who eagerly swept the kitchen with a broom almost taller than her, preparing a small corner of the living room with toys and books for Noah, and setting a chart on the fridge for meals, therapy visits, and check-ins with Nora. That evening, Nora arrived. She carried her leather-bound clipboard, her auburn hair tucked under a wool hat, her calm gaze sweeping the house. She was dressed simply, dark jeans and a scarf, but her presence filled the space with a quiet authority. "The house is safe, organized," she observed, "but routines matter as much as locks." She sat at the table with Lila, sliding over a coloring page. "How do you feel today?" Lila colored carefully, whispering, "Warm, like the lights won't go out." Nora's eyes softened. She wrote a note. "Child stabilizing, bond forming with guardian." Later, after Nora left, Ethan sat by the window while the children slept. Dana, in her room, prayed quietly under her breath, though her words carried the sound of someone unsure if she was heard. Rook lay at Ethan's feet, ears twitching at every sound outside. Ethan's hazel eyes drifted to the crayon house pinned to the fridge. Its windows glowed yellow, and the dog at the door stood tall. For the first time, he let himself imagine that house not just as a drawing, but as a future. The fragile calm inside Ethan's home lasted only a handful of days before the storm outside pressed in again. On a Thursday evening, the air turned brittle with sleet, pelting the windows with tiny shards of ice. Ethan had just returned from a late shift, his boots caked with frozen mud, when Rachel Park arrived. Her usually composed face was marked with tension, her black hair pulled tighter than usual into a bun, as if she were holding herself together by sheer will. "They've released another clip," Rachel announced as soon as Ethan shut the door. Her voice was clipped, each word honed like glass. She set her laptop on the table, flipping it open. The grainy video showed Ethan at the grocery store, but this time the edit was even crueler, cut to make it seem like he had grabbed Lila by the arm and shoved her toward the counter. Captions screamed across the screen, "Officer stages child's pain for career boost." Dana emerged from the hallway, her face pale, her ponytail messy as if she had been pacing. "They'll never leave us alone," she whispered, clutching her sweater sleeves. Lila stood behind her, eyes wide, clutching Noah's blanket to her chest. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his hazel eyes held steady. "Who released it?" Rachel adjusted her glasses, scrolling through metadata. "Anonymous accounts, but it reeks of Brenda. She's desperate. She knows charges are circling, so she's pushing harder. If this spreads, the court will question your guardianship. We need to counter it." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Standing on the porch was Paula Reyes, a community journalist in her late 20s, with curly dark hair, a denim jacket over a wool sweater, and a small notebook poking out of her bag. She had a reputation for chasing truth over headlines, often publishing in small local outlets rather than chasing the bigger networks. Her brown eyes carried both curiosity and empathy, a rare combination in her field. "I'm not here to attack you," Paula said, her voice careful. "I've seen the clips. They don't sit right with me. I want to hear the full story." Rachel studied her with sharp suspicion, but Ethan gestured for her to enter. Inside, Paula crouched slightly to meet Lila's eyes, her tone soft. "Sweetheart, you don't have to say anything you don't want. But if you'd like, you can show me what really happened." Lila glanced at Ethan, then at Rook, who patted over and pressed his heavy head against her arm. The dog's steady presence gave her courage. She nodded faintly, then pulled out her sketchbook. Slowly, she flipped through pages, drawings of the bridge, of Noah in her arms, of Brenda's sharp nails digging into her wrist. Finally, she showed one where Ethan stood between them and Darnell, Rook bristling by his side. "This is what happened," Lila whispered. Paula's throat tightened. She scribbled notes furiously, her pen barely keeping pace. "These sketches, they speak louder than any edited video." Rachel leaned against the counter, arms folded. "A sympathetic article won't erase a viral clip." "Maybe not," Paula replied, straightening. "But truth leaves a trail. People can choose to follow it if it's clear enough." The next morning, Paula's article appeared online under the headline, "Through a Child's Eyes, the Story Behind the Viral Clip." It featured Lila's drawings, descriptions of Ethan's intervention, and Nora's professional comments about the family's progress. The piece was heartfelt, quiet, not sensational, but it spread steadily across local networks. That afternoon, Nora Bennett arrived for her scheduled visit. She carried her clipboard, her auburn hair tucked into a scarf, her calm face unreadable. She inspected the house, neat kitchen, warm blankets for the children, food stocked. Then she sat with Dana, who seemed steadier than before, though weariness still clung to her eyes. "You're improving," Nora said gently. "But the outside noise can rattle progress. How are you holding up?" Dana hesitated, then admitted, "I want to run every time I see a camera, but I don't want to lose them again." Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. Nora nodded, jotting a note. "Determined to stay, though fearful. Progress visible." She glanced at Ethan. "You'll need to remain transparent. Every visit, every routine documented. The court doesn't bend for feelings. It bends for proof." That evening, Ethan sat at the table with Lila, helping her with a school worksheet Nora had brought. She struggled with reading, her small brow furrowed in frustration, but Ethan guided her patiently, his deep voice steady, never sharp. Noah cooed on the rug, and Rook lay stretched beside him, tail flicking each time the baby gurgled. Dana watched from the doorway, her lips trembling, because the scene was something she had almost forgotten could exist. A family that breathed in rhythm instead of chaos. Later that night, as sleet rattled against the windows, Ethan received a text from Ramirez. "Brenda cornered. Tina Lopez has more recordings. We'll bring them in tomorrow." Ethan exhaled slowly, his hand resting on the table where Lila's sketchbook lay open. The crayon house glowed under the lamplight, its windows shining bright. For the first time in days, he felt the lie's shadow thinning. In the end, this story reminds us that even in the darkest storms, God's light can shine through the simplest acts of courage and kindness. What Officer Ethan and his faithful German shepherd Rook did for little Lila and her brother was more than just protection. It was a miracle in action, a reflection of the love and mercy that God places in human hearts. And it is the same in our everyday lives. Sometimes the greatest miracles happen in small moments. Offering help to someone in need, standing up for what is right, or simply choosing compassion over silence. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others may feel the same hope. Leave a comment below, tell us your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel to join our community of faith and inspiration. May God bless you and your family today and always. And if you believe in miracles, write Amen in the comments so we can stand together in faith.